Can the X-Man Nightcrawler be the best version of Spider-Man? It's a possibility. What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Uncanny Spider-Man #1, written by Cy Spurrier, with art by Lee Garbett and color by Matt Mia. When last we left off with Nightcrawler over on the X-Men side of things, there was a lot that was going on with him. He had been virtually put through the ringer, and I'm not going to recap everything that happened with Nightcrawler in this video because we would literally be here all day. But what I will do is I will put a link up here in the cards. You can go check out that video. There's actually a couple of different videos I'll probably put in the cards for you, and you can go check them out now and then come back to this video or watch them after this video, whichever you prefer. But those videos will give you more insight into what's been going on with old Kurt Wagner this entire time. But if you want the Cliff Notes version of it, basically what you need to know is that Orchis, by way of Nightcrawler's adopted mother, Marguerite Zardos, had transformed Nightcrawler into a more demonic version of himself, completely under their control in the latter portions of that transformation, and they used Nightcrawler as a mind-wiped assassin to take down various members of royal families and dignitaries, as well as open critics of Krakoa across the world, and doing it in a way that was quite obvious and would pretty much let you know Nightcrawler was the one that did it. I posed the question at the beginning of this video: can Nightcrawler be the best Spider-Man? And the answer is quite simple. Yeah, he has the potential to be so. I mean, look at it. The guy has the exact same abilities as Spider-Man for the most part, minus the spider sense. Nightcrawler has the same superhuman reflexes and agility that Peter Parker Spider-Man has. He also has the same ability to stick to walls and ceilings, just like Spider-Man does. And while he doesn't have wrist-mounted web fluid cartridges and the aforementioned spider sense, he does have the ability to teleport, and this is objectively better than being able to web swing, in my opinion. I would even dare say it's objectively even more annoying to his enemies than web swinging can be. Now, don't get me wrong. There are other abilities that Spider-Man has that Nightcrawler doesn't, but they're things that I don't think people even really think about. There's Spider-Man's equilibrium. Spider-Man is actually stronger than Nightcrawler is in a lot of respects, and more durable, and also able to heal faster from injury than Nightcrawler. But those are little things that I feel Nightcrawler doesn't have in his skill set that don't really matter, because he also has powers that Spider-Man doesn't. I mentioned his ability to teleport earlier, and not only can he teleport, but he can also sense when other people teleport around him, and his range has actually increased significantly since his early days in the X-Men. Initially, he used to only be able to do short bursts, about roughly 2 to 3 miles in any one given direction, but eventually it increased to the point where he could teleport almost 600 miles in one single teleport, and since then he's actually increased that even more. He has proven that he can travel anywhere from 3 to almost 8,000 miles in a given distance just on one teleport alone. And the scary part is, it's also been said that during the House of X era, that range has increased even more. Not only that, he still leaves behind that brimstone scent whenever he teleports, so I imagine, yeah, it's probably even more annoying to Spider-Man's villains than Peter Parker's witty banter could probably ever be. Just imagine if you were fighting a Spider-Man and that said Spider-Man was constantly ripping wet farts just repeatedly as if he had eaten the entire Taco Bell menu. You wouldn't want to fight that guy. That said, the other ability that Nightcrawler has at his disposal that Spider-Man doesn't is that he has access to a very soul sword style weapon referred to as the Hope Sword, which we first saw in Legion of X #10. It was the very weapon that Marguerite Zardos was manipulating Nightcrawler in order to obtain over the course of that series, having taken it from him at the end of Legion of X, with Nightcrawler getting it back during the X-Men Before the Fall Sons of X one-shot. The Hope Sword, as I stated earlier, is a Soul Sword style weapon, and while Nightcrawler is no stranger to having wielded a Soul Sword in the past, this one works a little bit differently. We don't really know all the ins and outs of it yet. We really haven't even seen him use it terribly often. Not only that, it also might be partially responsible for why the Stark Sentinels that Orchis has been utilizing lately can't detect his X gene. At least it can at first, and then eventually it just can't anymore. Another reason why Nightcrawler's X gene is likely being masked may not have to do with the Hope Sword at all, but I think it's a likely connection considering that one of the little BAMFs that we see in this issue, for those unfamiliar, BAMFs were a Chris Claremont creation that have seemingly hung around ever since. We've seen them in varying capacities here or there that are, for all intents and purposes, living ideas, or at the very least are created whenever an idea is created. And while the creature we see in this issue could be a BAMF or could not be a BAMF, it looks like a BAMF, but also a BAMF with a very similar coloration to the Hope Sword. So it could either be a BAMF in and of itself, or it could just as easily be the Hope Sword's manifestation or whatever. Right now, that part is very difficult to suss out. At first, when we started reading the disembodied voice of what could very well likely be the BAMF or the Hope Sword or both, I initially thought maybe this was Legion talking to Nightcrawler because he disappeared during X-Men Before the Fall Sons of X one-shot that I mentioned earlier, where oddly enough we actually saw our first tease of this BAMF in question. So I don't know, maybe there could be some crosstalk there, especially when you consider how connected Legion and Nightcrawler have become, how intrinsically tied to one another they have been since the House of X era kicked off. So yeah, I'm gonna go along and say maybe that is Legion. And while yeah, I did say this BAMF doesn't necessarily talk like Legion, Legion literally has millions of personalities. Who's to say that's not one of them? But the question now becomes, what role is the Hope Sword gonna play in all this? And honestly, I think it's difficult to say at this point, but I do feel like Nightcrawler is gonna be able to use the Hope Sword in ways that will very likely help him in his fight against Orchis. But as far as like what direct part it's going to play in all this, I couldn't honestly say. Another feather in Nightcrawler's cap that he has that Spider-Man doesn't is that you are gonna hit that like button. Each and every one of you can do the one thing that a spider can't, and that's hit that like button. And you can also hit subscribe and tap that notification bell so that way you don't miss out on any of my videos breaking down future Uncanny Spider-Man comics, as well as other X-Men related comics and other comics from Marvel, DC, and wherever else. Doing all three of those things ensures that you become one of Earth's mightiest subscribers, and will also prevent you from becoming as smelly as one of Nightcrawler's BAMFs. But I digress. All powers aside, I will admit Nightcrawler's witty banter does need a little bit of work. It's a little dry in some spots, and there is a point in this comic where he refers to himself as the Spiderman, which is supposed to be Spider-Man in German, but Spinner is spider, not spinning. So technically in this comic, I think he might have just called himself the acting crazy man, because that's what spinning means, which I know it's weird. It's a very fine line. All it takes is the addition of one N to turn you from a spider to Florida man. I do appreciate in the series he has the blessing of Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. Even the suit that he's wearing is apparently one of Peter's old suits, one of his old alternatives, though I honestly don't remember him ever wearing one quite like this, though it does look similar in some ways to the Spider-Man stealth suit, maybe just repurposed a little. Hard to say at this point, I'm not gonna pretend to know. But Nightcrawler is uniquely suited to take up Spider-Man's good work, and while Peter Parker isn't necessarily taking a breather or anything, he's not, hanging up his tights so Nightcrawler can do his thing, but he has no issue with Nightcrawler operating as Spider-Man in New York at the same time he is, while Nightcrawler could very likely be outed as a mutant and just make more trouble for Peter Parker. He doesn't care. He knows that Nightcrawler is going through some things, and if anyone could empathize with what Nightcrawler is going through, having been framed for murder, being hated by the city that he protects, and even at various points on this, we see that the very people that Nightcrawler protects while he is in the guise of Spider-Man, a lot of those people love him, but they don't like mutants. We see this when the homeless people who step out of the shadows in Central Park when he is stopping a robbery, they love him. They try and come up with all kind of crazy names for him, which also makes me wonder, there was a real missed opportunity to not call him Spy Demon. And someone calls him that on one of the little message board things in this comic. It's hilarious. Or like Devil Spider, Hellcrawler even. There are a lot of really cool names we could have gotten out of this, but neither here nor there. Point of the matter is, these people don't like mutants. We even see a woman who is jogging, who is being accosted by a thief. Even she has a necklace on that warns her when mutants come into contact with her. And it just, yeah, there's a whole lot of xenophobia going on that Nightcrawler, while he's used to, it's just the idea that people don't seem to be afraid of him until they get the suspicion that he might be a mutant. Before, people just were afraid of him in general just because of his overall appearance, but now people seem perfectly fine with him now that he's put a mask on, despite the fact that he has a prehensile tail. If anyone would be able to jive with what Kurt's going through, Spider-Man has gone through a lot of these things, minus being a mutant. Well, except if you count that time during, House of M, but then he was actually light. You get where I'm going with this. Nightcrawler has inherited the mantle of Spider-Man, but that's not the only thing that comes with it. Now, of course, he's probably going to inherit the patented Parker luck and all this. I mean, what Spider-Man doesn't have it? However, he's also going to inherit some of Spider-Man's rogues gallery. Because, I mean, that's just a thing. If you become a Spider-Man, that just means you have to throw hands with characters like Doc Ock and the Rhino, so on and so forth. But in this particular case, he is actually going to be throwing hands with Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture, or as he prefers to be called nowadays, Director Vulture. Adrian Toomes, for one reason or another, is now working alongside Orcus, and it's not really that far out of the spectrum of possibility, I guess, when I really think about it, because Adrian Toomes is a very well-respected scientist. He's actually quite gifted when it comes to computer and technological engineering. He's considered, at the very least, to be a genius-level intellect, despite the fact that he makes very questionable life choices when it comes to Spider-Man. And since he gets sunned a lot, it's very easy to forget that he is quite the intelligent guy. That said, it also seems like what Adrian Toomes is doing in this particular instance is that he is trying to recreate Ahab's Hound program using the transmode virus. We see him working on former X-Force member Feral, infecting her with the transmode virus. This is actually something that is straight out of the ONE's playbook, because I've talked about multiple times in the past during the Matthew Rosenberg run on Uncanny X-Men, the ONE used the transmode virus to turn mutants into sleeper agent sentinels. They would, for the most part, appear like normal looking mutants, despite the fact that you could very clearly tell that they were infected with the transmode virus. You would see the patented black and yellow markings all over their body. That would totally give the game away. What would happen is whenever they came into the presence of other mutants who were not sleeper agent sentinels, they would then become weaponized and then eventually turn into a form of sentinel. The reason why he's creating the Hounds is because, as I said earlier, the sentinels are starting to not be able to detect Nightcrawler, which is starting to make Orcus wonder whether or not they can rely on the Stark Tech sentinels to hunt mutants as reliably as they initially thought. This is why the Hound program is being enacted, so they have yet one more way to suss out mutants. Adrian Toomes is reheating the ONE's leftovers, but also making sure to put his own spin on it. Now, the transmode virus isn't only being used to create the new Hounds, they're also being used to empower the Vulture himself. As we see in this issue, he has on some kind of a control collar that also seems to house his flight mask and his wings. Vulture is not the only member of Spider-Man's rogues gallery that the Uncanny Spider-Man will have to face. He'll also have to face off against Rhino, as we see in the preview for the next issue. Now, we don't know the reason why Rhino is involved in all this, and I'm kind of sad to see him here because it could mean one of two things. It could mean that the path of redemption that Rhino has started out on during the Devil's Reign story arc has been completely thrown out the window, because during that event, Rhino made it pretty public that he was tired of working for villains and that he wasn't really interested in hurting children, and this was kind of what kicked him off going in the direction of being a less evil character. One thing that could also be going on here is that he is, in fact, still on his redemption arc, just that in this case, because the rest of the world doesn't seem to know it either, he probably, like many others, believes that Orcus are the good guys and is working with them because he believes that they're not doing anything wrong, that they're trying to save humanity. And that, I think, would actually make everything going on here even more sad. The last of the characters we know for a fact that the Uncanny Spider-Man is going to be dealing with is the on and off again enemy slash frenemy of Spider-Man, and that is Sylvia Sablinova, aka Silver Sable. We see that Orchis has hired Silver Sable's, I guess what is now her new version of the Wild Pack. They have hired them to try to hunt down the new Uncanny Spider-Man because Orchis isn't as dumb as they look sometimes, and they know for a fact that's Nightcrawler. They just don't have indisputable evidence to prove it, but they're going after him hard body, not just using the Vulture's hounds, but also using Silver Sable's new Wild Pack. And while Silver Sable has been an on-again, off-again enemy of Spider-Man and is actually more inclined to work with Spider-Man nowadays as opposed to working against him, we also can probably safely assume that she's not going to be Nightcrawler's enemy the entire time, because even while she is preparing her troops to go take him down, she makes a few passing mentions that give you the impression that she's probably not going to actually help Orchis in taking him down. Now, you're probably sitting here wondering that I haven't brought up Mystique in all this, and honestly, I wasn't going to at first because I have said countless times since the Hellfire Gala of this year that Mystique wasn't dead. So anyone who is shocked to see Mystique alive right now, I have bridges in Arizona that I am willing to sell you for a fair price. I've literally been saying it this entire time. Mystique is not dead. She is very much alive, and yeah, here she is. Though I will say the one thing that is of note is that she seems to be very disoriented. She keeps referring to having lost her baby, and I'm gonna go on a limb and say that the fall that she suffered during the Hellfire Gala, it seems like that fall very likely gave her amnesia, scrambled her brain or some sort, and she is very likely referring to Nightcrawler when she's talking about her baby, though in her mind she probably still thinks that it's back when she had initially gave birth to Nightcrawler. And with everything being revealed about what's going on with the X-Men Blue one-shot that's coming up, and that there's going to be a retcon involved there that's going to recontextualize Nightcrawler and Mystique's relationship, because Mystique, for a lot of people who may or may not remember, she is in fact Nightcrawler's birth mother. Something is going to be done there that's going to recontextualize that whole thing, and this is going to be the catalyst for it. That said, that is pretty much everything I want to talk about with Uncanny Spider-Man #1. This issue started off great. This is honestly everything I was hoping that it would be. This is everything that when I saw the initial solicits, this is what I expected. I expected to see a Nightcrawler who, under the mask, is being a lot more jovial and very similar to the Nightcrawler we're so used to seeing. But when he takes the mask off and has to reflect upon the things that he was forced to do by Orchis, he becomes that tortured soul that we're also quite familiar with, and it's also heartbreaking to see. But anyways, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and let me know what you thought about Uncanny Spider-Man #1. Keep it plus ultra, and sound off in the comments.